Hey there, Willowbrook. Thanks for doing daily devos with us. Today we're in Ephesians chapter 3. Paul is writing a letter to the church in Ephesus. And in the chapter just before, one of the most important verses in Scripture talks about that we have been saved by grace through faith. It's not from anything we can do. And in fact, to this point in the book of Ephesians, we haven't heard from Paul where he's talking about anything to do with their outer fruits, of these fruits of the Spirit, maybe love, joy, peace, patience. He hasn't talked about any of those up unto this point. But in chapter 3, he mentions something that's really important. He starts the chapter and talks about the chapter as far as unity is concerned. Because before Jesus, salvation was only for the Jews. But Paul says, hey, because of Jesus, salvation is for everyone. So whether your politics are different, whether your race is different, whether your background is different, whatever, salvation is available for everyone. But he begins a prayer for them. And he talks to them not so much about their outer fruit, but he's talking to them about something inner. He talks to them about being rooted in love. Rooted in love. Now, I have to tell you that I have a black thumb when it comes to plants. My mom, on the other hand, has an extraordinarily green thumb. I love plants. I just can't seem to keep them alive. But when I was growing up, part of my chores would be to go out and water the plants. And one of the things that I remember learning from my mom was that we're not trying to water the fruit. We want to water the root. We want to get down onto the root, and that's where we want to nurture and cultivate, not the fruit. And that's what Paul is telling the church of Ephesus. This is what he says in Ephesians chapter 3, starting in verse 16. He says, I pray that he may grant you, according to the richness of his glory, to be strengthened with power in your inner being through his Spirit, and that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. I pray that you, being rooted and firmly established in love, that you may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the length and the width and the height and the depth of God's love, and to know Christ's love that surpasses knowledge, so that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. You know, a lot of times we talk about unity and getting along and loving one another, and we talk about some of these outer works that we can do, how we can serve one another, how we can be kind, how our words can matter. But what Paul is saying is, he said, unless you are rooted in the love of God, it's just watering the fruit. But when we begin to water the root and we begin to comprehend the enormity of God's love for us, it changes everything. In fact, when it says in verse 19, and to know Christ's love, it's not talking about this kind of knowledge. It's talking about an experiential knowledge. When we begin to fully embrace what Christ has done for us, the grace that we need, not the grace that the sinful world needs, the grace that I need and we have received because of the enormous love of God. When we know that love, it is watering the root. It changes what's inside so that the outpouring, the acts, the fruit that we see of love towards one another is coming from something deep. It's not just, I checked off a box and I did this and this and this. Unity happens within the church when we allow the work of God inside of us, when we've embraced and wrapped our brain around it and fully experienced this depth and height and length of God's love. I think that is why God, I've heard my husband Jared say this every time we go on vacation to the beach or the mountains. He said, I think God has put in us something that makes our hearts and mind in awe of what we see. Because when we look out at the ocean and it just goes and goes and goes, God's love is even greater than that. It's deeper, it's wider, it's longer, it's higher than the highest mountain. And that's the love that he has for you. And when we truly embrace, when we know that love, it means we become rooted in that and we can love others better. I hope that you'll have a happy Wednesday.